I think like many people in England, and many people in many countries, the shadow of the First World War court-martials is something which remains as a shadow upon English history, and like all shadows, attract people's attention, and it attracted mine. How did it come about that so many young people were on trial for their life, unrepresented, under the age of 18, for example? How was it that the tribunals that were trying them were often made up of people with little or no legal experience or military training in military law whatsoever? So I was drawn to the subject, and what I did was I read as many of the transcripts as I could in the National Archives.
"I'll read out the relevant passage," said the CO. "The point raised on drunkenness and intention, that a drunken frolic may evince a lack of intention to evade duty in an otherwise reliable soldier, has no merit in this case. Flanagan did not absent himself because he was drunk, but because he was sober. The episode with alcohol came after an absence of almost 40 hours. This was implicitly accepted by Flanagan, though it was not formally brought out at the trial by the prosecutor."
Without beginning to think of a story, I read one after the other. I took individual soldiers and, for example, followed through the life of that particular soldier's battalion. And the way I did that was by looking at the battalion war diary and then the brigade war diary, from before the person's offence of desertion, for example, through to the execution, to see what the life experience had been of a particular battalion or a particular brigade within a particular division.
Against the low skyline, Herbert saw the rifles at the shoulders, the barrels black against the early morning light. Overcome with unhappiness, remorse and protest, Herbert's eyes blurred. In the fields on either side, larks had joined the song. He tore at his battle dress, wanting to get at his chest, to bring out the pain. All he could do was listen to this fresh sound, so much worse than shell fire, and follow the steady march towards the break of day.
When I left school, I joined a religious order, the Augustinians, a decision of which I was absolutely sure. And 6 years later, it's an epic I'm going to reduce to a brief sentence, but I became quite sure that my place was not going to be in religious life, not with the Augustinians. It wasn't a loss of faith or any nature like that. It was simply a sense that the road that had brought me in was beginning to lead me out. I began to consider a career, a future career, and it was at the bar. I eventually qualified and became a barrister. And it was after 10 years I'd been at the bar, and I'd reached that age of 40 where I think one begins to look a little bit back on one's life. And this interest in writing had remained as a sort of a stone in the shoe. And I realised unless I do something about this, it will remain something that I've never dealt with. And I'd rather have started to write, tried it and failed, for want of a better word, than not tried at all. When I first thought of writing, I was very sure of a central character that I wanted to use as a vehicle throughout all my novels, who I called Anselm, who is a monk who was a barrister. Someone, if you like, from a position of reflection, but who's had a life of action. This was my starting point. I had this as my point of departure, even before I knew what the subject matter of any novel I was going to write, because I wanted to situate Anselm and Larkwood itself as the outsider in fiction, the stranger who would then enter into, as a guide, to take the reader as a guide into the various sorts of moral problems that I would like to explore. And that was my starting point for all the novels that I've written. I did have a very strong sense of arrival, that this was something that I wanted to do and couldn't imagine would ever want to do anything else. And 8 years later, that remains true. It's very much I I don't even like to call it a career. It's a way of living. It's a way of expressing oneself. It's the most rich and fulfilling thing I can imagine, and I can't imagine doing anything else.